With this video, we come to the current year of Russian politics, 2020. Now, if you remember, hopefully you do, all along during the Putin period, we've been talking that the principal issue is succession. Who is going to rule the country? Ever since Putin became acting president in 2000 and then won the election in March that year and established his rule, there is this concern about who will follow him. And you remember the controversy around 2008, which I think one of the writers called it 2008 problem. What was going to happen because he had served 2 consecutive years as president. And that's essentially what the Constitution allows for. But he then creates the castling move, creating the tandem where he switches positions with Medvedev. And for 4 years, Medvedev is the president, at least in name only. The real power during the period 2004, 2008 was still Prime Minister Putin. I'm sure you understand that. Then after the Medvedev years, remember they changed the Constitution to allow for 6-year rules. So with Putin's coming back to the presidency in 2012, we saw that his first term was up in 2018. He ran again. He's currently the president. His presidency will expire in 2024. And then the issue is what happens after that. Now, after 4 consecutive terms and he'll be in his 70s, his health seems to be pretty good, but is he going to continue to run? That has been a dominant issue. And the various clans, the various people around Putin, the groups around him, there have been a lot of reports that they've become anxious as to what's going to happen, where the country goes in 2020. There is a saying that was created by the new ideological chief, Volodin. He kind of took over after Surkov got booted out. No Putin, no Russia. All right. If Putin goes, what happens to Russia? Does Russia collapse? And there's a lot of destabilizing forces going on, taking place in Russia, this huge country with declining population. The economy has been stagnant now for years. What happens after he goes? A lot of turmoil below the surface, a lot of grumbling and uneasiness that you can feel among the elites. What happens after? And then we get this great shock in 2020. So take a look at the sheet that you have, and it begins with Putin kind of implying to a group of World War II veterans that he's not going to run again. That's January 7th of this year. But do we believe that? You know, he's often given these hints that he'll do this, and then he does he does something directly opposite. So no one was sure what this was going to mean. But certainly we all got an earful and an eye-opening presentation when he made his State of the Union speech, January 15th. Now, it's a long speech. It's well over an hour long. Most of the speech is devoted to these goals, these national priorities that he has set. And but it also contains some very sweeping constitutional changes. But as I said, most of it seemed to be going on about how he's going to turn the economy around. They're going to spend more on social welfare. They are going to provide hot lunches, as it says here, for the kids. They're going to increase the subsidies for families to have more children because the demographic decline is a serious concern of his. Most of it is about these projects that he has set up to rebuild infrastructure, modernize the economy. But from the readings and from hopefully my lectures, you'll understand the problems associated with trying to modernize this Russian economy. This has really become a crony capitalist system. And one of the books that I recommend is Anslin's book called Russia's Crony Capitalism, From Market Economy to Kleptocracy. Uh, Great book by a Swedish economist who is very knowledgeable about Russian government politics, has been an advisor to Yeltsin in the past. All right, so uh, let's get back to this speech on January 15th. So after, you know, rambling on and on about these national projects and how important it is and how they're going to spend more money in the next budget. And remember, most of these projects have been lingering since Putin's memorandum to the Russian people in 2000 when he was first campaigning, that's in quotes, campaigning to be the elected president. And most of them have fallen far short of their goals. All right, but then he wows the country uh, with these constitutional changes, and as a result of the proposed changes, shortly after the next day, I think it was after the speech or later that day, the entire cabinet, Prime Minister Medvedev and the whole cabinet resigns. So let's take a look at these very dramatic changes that he proposes. And, you can read it too. Here he has been building the power of the presidency. He has taken the super presidential system that Yeltsin had put in place but could never fully utilize because of the economic conditions. He's taken that super presidential system and, as Brian Taylor argues, has made it into a hyper presidential system. And the whole system revolves around the president. He has weakened the power of the Federation Council, that's the upper house of the assembly. He's weakened the power of the State Duma by helping to construct this United Russia party that dominates the Duma now. He has gone after judicial power by changing the way the Constitutional Court selected. He has tried to mold a civil society that is subservient to the Kremlin. He has attacked foreign NGOs. All these efforts at building a strong presidential system. And yet these proposals that he's putting forth on January 15th would mean that the future presidents would have less power and that future prime ministers would have more power. The Duma, in fact, instead of just agreeing to the president's cabinet, would in the future, if this amendments are passed, and there every expectation they will be, the Duma would actually appoint the cabinet. And then he talks about the State Council. This is an entity that is largely one of these advisory commissions that he has set up. In fact, it goes back to 2000. It was created by him to give him advice. Now, the current composition of the State Council is quite interesting. The president is a member. The Speaker of the Federation Council, who happens to come from from St. Petersburg, the Speaker of the State Duma, Volodin, who was the one who was that statement, no Putin, no Russia. Nine plenipotentiary representatives to the districts that were created in one of his reforms, supposedly. Those 9 men, all men, are represented there. The heads of the government of the constitutional entities, the 85 parts of the Russian Federation, as well as the heads of the party factions in the Duma of the 4 separate parties: United Russia, the Communist Party, Liberal Democratic Party, and Just Russia, those 4. That's quite a big group of people. But they've just been advisory. The president can call them once or twice a year, come together, because he has weakened the power of the so-called governors of the regions and the entities. This is a way that they can feel that they're rubbing elbows and giving some input to the president. But this state council is going to have new constitutional status. It's going to oversee the appointment of the heads of the security services. And you know how critical control of the security services, or the force ministries, um, how important that is for the continuation of this system that Putin has created. Also, the Constitution he proposes, or the changes he proposes, limits a presidential term to 2 terms, not consecutive, just 2 terms. It will prohibit a presidential candidate from running if they have ever lived abroad. Now that's interesting because he has lived in East Germany. Um, uh, some people have pointed out that Alexei Navalny studied in the United States for a year, and that would probably, under this new constitution, deny him the ability to run. And you know that there's been this ongoing controversy with Navalny attempting to run for president, attempting to run for mayor of Moscow, and the regime has done everything it can to use those, quote, filters to try to prevent him and other possible opposition candidates from running for office. All right. Also, this set of proposals that Putin makes would establish the supremacy of Russian law over international law and agreements. And again, I hope you remember from the readings, particularly, there have been a number of instances where dissidents in Putin's Russia who have been arrested and fined have appealed to the European Court of Human Rights to take a look at their case. And in almost every incident, I can't think of one where the human rights courts didn't say that the trials and the penalties that were assessed were excessive and unfair and should be abrogated, it should be eliminated. Now, that hasn't happened because the Russian government has to then enact and enforce those rules. And so the European Human Rights Court is basically advisory. But again, Putin is tired of having foreigners tell him things are not operating correctly or humanely or constitutionally in his country. And so this would give uh, some support to the fact that there is Russian law, that is supreme in Russia and for Russian citizens. And the last part is that, and now this was vague in his speech, that he proposes that these changes not just be voted on, but that the people consult and have some input into them. This later turns out to be that they were planning to have a referendum yesterday, April. Well, today is the 23rd of April when I'm doing this, but on April 22nd, they had planned this national referendum to ask the people whether they supported or didn't support these provisions and these changes to the Constitution. The interesting thing is I have here is that that April 22nd was the 150th anniversary of the birth of Vladimir Lenin. Um, so I'm sure you can pick that date just out of thin air. I think he picked it up because he likes to have this continuity of Russian history. But of course, we all know that given the fact that the coronavirus has also impacted Russia, they've had to cancel. They did not hold that referendum yesterday. All right, so now what's behind this? What's the kind of motivation you think that was behind this? There are some who say that Putin, some scholars are speculating that Putin is trying to shift the power to the prime ministership, and that when his presidency ends, because of United Russia's overwhelming control of the Duma, that Putin would uh, take over the prime ministership, and that probably one of his allies, maybe Medvedev again, would run for the presidency in 2024. But now there's others who say, yeah, that might be the case, but there are some who speculate that because of this changing role of the state council, that Putin may be gearing up to uh, to take the control of the state council, and that he would stay as the head of the state council in a almost for life position, because the state council would be able to control the force ministries, the military, the FSB, the interior ministry, etc., the courts, as well as be able to give direction for the economics. So that this could put Putin above the inner workings of the Russian government, but actually keep control of the whole system. I think certainly the real motivation is he wanted to end all this speculation of what happens in 2024. Send a message out there that there will be stability. Because remember, that's one of his key goals of establishing, that there will be stability in the system. Now, one of the factors also seems to be that Medvedev has been under attack recently, particularly because Alexei Navalny and his Anti-Corruption Foundation have published a document and a video on the supposed corruption of Medvedev. Now, remember, Medvedev was a lawyer, an advisor to the Soviet government. He comes to um, Moscow following Putin and has moved up in power with Putin. Well, apparently Medvedev has a number of houses, very elaborate houses that have been built, and Navalny used a drone to take pictures of these houses because they're not open to the public. They used the drone to take a lot of pictures of a yacht that he has, a vineyard that he supposedly owns, and some people leaking information about money that he has amassed. Um, and this corruption that, remember, Navalny is the one who argued that, or made the statement that United Russia is a party of crooks and thieves. So he's gone after that party continually. There's also, so maybe he needs to get Medvedev out, but those that think that Medvedev may be moving up to the presidency and Putin back to the prime ministership kind of dismiss this, so remains to be seen. But certainly the issue is letting settle this question. Putin is not going away in 2024, even if he's not the president. He will still have an important role. He'll still be the center of politics in Russia. And then I have here, there is some thought that this was maybe perhaps modeled after the situation in Iran, where you have the supreme Ayatollah who is above politics. He's the one who has to have a final say on any important changes. And you have him being advised by a group of mullahs, but that the Ayatollah in top, the supreme Ayatollah, is the most important person in the political system. Same thing has happened somewhat in Kazakhstan, where the longtime ruler resigned from the presidency and took a position like the state council, where a lifetime position, where he can continue advise and direct, and then members of his family have moved up into important positions. So while Putin's personal family maybe not moving into important positions, later in the next video I'm going to talk about the clans and the group networks that have surrounded Putin and that have built this system that some are calling Putinism. All right. All right. The next day after his long speech, and very dramatic speech at the end, anyway, you have a new nominee for the prime ministership, Mikhail Mishustin, and this guy is largely a technocrat, doesn't seem to have any real political ambition, no real power base, and he's the head of the former tax service, and apparently he did a pretty good job of revising the tax service, trying to eliminate corruption within it, and to be sure that this tax service really help bring revenues into the central government. And of course, following that, the Duma with the domination of United Russia just confirms Putin's choice. However, about a week after that, you have the first couple of COVID-19 cases reported in Russia. Now, the first reports were that these were cases that came out in the Far East along the border with China, which is not surprising. But it has quickly spread throughout the country. An interesting thing, we'll see where this develops. On the 25th, the Prime Minister said that the finance minister in the future would report directly to him, not to a deputy prime minister. And this deputy prime minister, Belousov, is one of the people associated with Putin. So what you're wondering, is this the finance minister trying to distance himself from Putin, which is kind of strange because he was appointed by Putin. So I don't know where this will go. A few days later, though, Transparency International talked. They release. They do this every year. An index of corruption. They look at 180 countries, and they rank them from the most open and least corrupt to the most corrupt. And Russia ranks pretty high up there in the category of corrupt. Out of an effort to try from a number one being least corrupt, they are 137th most corrupt state out of 180 states that are on this Transparency International Index. And strangely enough, the very next day, the Russian Academy of Sciences for Education published a report that highlighted this perverse culture of corruption that tends to exist in Russia today. And they said that they found evidence of plagiarism in 850 articles in 263 scholarly journals within the past few years. So this is people, academics plagiarizing from others to enhance their career. We think that this has been spurred on by the fact that since the economy has been stagnant, and it's not been growing since 2009, the Putin regime has been pushing to modernize the economy, to get it moving again. And a lot of this has been putting a lot of pressure on academics and researchers to come up with new ways to do things, new investigations, new discoveries. We think that this has created a lot of pressure on these regimes, on these academics, and has resulted in many of them publishing, making up research, etc. January ends with Levada Center issuing a number of polls. Now, Levada Center is the most respected, even in the West, public opinion agency in Russia. They do a pretty fair job as a non-governmental organization. Most of this is thought to be by Western scholars a pretty accurate assessment of opinion in Russia. 27% of the people want Putin to stay on in power, and 25% want him to get out, go get a private life, and 33% want him to still have some kind of role. So that position of heading up the state council might be something that most people would be happy with. In February, the 2019 GDP reports come out that the economy, from its high in the days of high oil prices, when it was around 7% a year, the growth rate is 1.3, far below the projected 5% that they were aiming at. Acknowledge that wages are stagnant, that pensions have been scaled back, and that people are complaining about high taxes. February 18th, there is a working group to try to put together these reforms and put them in the proper language. And they come up with a proposal to grant immunity to former presidents. Now remember, one of the first things that Putin did when he became president was grant immunity to Yeltsin, immunity from any prosecution. Now this working group has come back to say the same thing, to protect the president after he steps down from office. And uh, they're also establishing the role of the president as heading up the executive branch. And while when we look at Russian politics, we always think Putin is the center, and that's true. Um, there has been some technical matters about who is actually head. Is it the prime minister that heads the executive branch, because that's the working government, or is it the president? Um, and so they're trying to reiterate it's the president. And that would be also interesting because if Putin's not going to run for president again, and he becomes prime minister, then he's not really in charge. But we'll see how that really works out. In the a few days later, 10 days, Surkov, who had been a deputy prime minister and advisor to Putin's out of office, out of position now, and he still is good for an interesting interview, and so he gives this interview where he speculates that. Says if you look at this proposed constitution, there is a legal logic that dictates that the terms of office of the president uh, of the past wouldn't count. So in other words, this is such a dramatic change that time served as president in the past shouldn't be held against future presidents. This, if you follow this logic, would enable Putin to run for 2 more terms. So again, we'll have to see how this plays out throughout the year 2020. Uh, Navalny's Anti-Corruption Foundation, it's known by the Russian initials FKB, they've been fined a substantial amount, and now they are being forced by the government to register as a foreign agent to help even discredit them even more from from the Russian people supporting them. Putin now orders the state council, so maybe he does want to become head of the state council, continue that role, to form a working group to prepare for the COVID-19. So they're beginning to try to work on that. A few days later, they make this big production of sending on a Russian military plane medics and first aid equipment to Italy because Italy is being ravaged by this virus at the time. A few days after that, Putin announces that because of the virus, they're going to postpone this constitutional referendum. April 14th, I think the numbers were up to about 18,000. I think the last thing I just saw was that it's about 28,000 people infected now, and the number is rising. And then Putin, in a video conference on the 14th, to the country, said that the situation is changing pretty rapidly. It's not getting better, and that the next few weeks would be decisive for Russia. And on the 17th, he postponed the Victory Day celebration. This is a big deal for Russia, particularly for Putin. He would invite world leaders to come, stand up on Lenin's tomb there, and look down at the Soviet military as they parade, as citizens groups would parade, political parties would have floats, and people would be participating. The 75th anniversary of the end of World War II in Europe, Victory Day, on May 9th. And this has been postponed, again, because of the coronavirus. And there are some people beginning to speculate that this may be a very important and very significant event for Russia and how Putin deals with it. Because the economy has been flat. The Russian foreign adventures, let's say, in Crimea and Ukraine and Syria have somewhat elevated Russia's international position, but it's had a very negative spillover at home. And if the coronavirus results in the shutdown of the Russian economy, that'll put a great strain on the Russian government. Are they going to be able to provide paychecks to all the workers throughout Russia that will be out of work as a result of this virus? This is going to be real careful watching, because it possibly could be a devastating critique, result in a devastating critique of the inefficiencies of the Putin government. That Putin may be popular, but the government that he has created, this group of clans around him that are always out for themselves, this may, in a possible scenario in the future, lead to the overthrow of the Putin regime. Uh, if the people aren't satisfied, and if the weakened health system that has been strapped for funds for years under Putin cannot really provide for the health of the Russian people. So they are distancing now. Many things have been closed down. This bears continual watching throughout the rest of the semester. What's happening regarding the virus? So that's it. For Russian politics up to this point, and hopefully you've been able to follow along. I've noticed that the number of watchers on a number of viewings on the early videos are starting to go up, and that's a good thing because I'm working on the final review sheet, which will be basically the final exam, and a lot of that, half of that exam is coming out of lectures and knowledge that you should have gathered from specifically from the books, and that half of the exam will be on specific questions from the Myers and Sockwell book. All right. So if you have questions for me, you know my email. Please send them to me as soon as you can. Good luck now.